Thanks for tuning into the 6-3 podcast. I'm your host, Joel, and my co-host, Ben. A somber week after the Lions kind of slipped back to the SOL after being rebranded as the brand new Lions by Pat McAfee himself. They looked rough. They did look like they kind of degraded back down to where we're supposed to be, and they were due a clunker. Don't get me wrong. They're overachieving for a good stretch there. So it's hard to be it's hard to be mad. And yet at the end of the year, they're still at 7 wins, which we kind of predicted anywhere between 7 and 9. So it's they're kind of right on schedule. They got to play a home game this week against the Bears, which is essentially it's a must win. You lose this game, forget it. Playoffs are over. And then you get 2 picks in probably the range of 8. The way the Rams are playing right now, the range of 8 to 20. So, it's going to be it's still not bad landing spots for the draft. Still feels like a win, or at least a tie on that trade with the Rams getting their Super Bowl.
Super Bowl if you're the Rams all day long and you don't even ask questions. But if you're the Lions, where they were as far as in their development as a team, that I think right now you'll take it. Unfortunately, you felt like you could have been maybe a better team than Carolina. I know Carolina played really well and maybe exposed a few things, and but the Lions just weren't ready to play. I mean, Dan Campbell even said it right after the game. I did not have them ready to go. So, and it does happen, right? It occurs in the NFL, right? You don't see it manifest itself in giving up like 300 rushing yards very often in the NFL, especially. But I think the Panthers are actually pretty decent. I don't think they're terrible, especially running the ball and up front. And the Lions clunker, like you said, they just had a terrible game. I mean, they weren't ready to play pretty much on both sides of the ball. And, Goff played pretty darn good regardless, but his fumble too, bad snap, but still hit him in the hands. He's got to hold on to the snap. I mean, that was kind of game changing. The Lions were kind of downhill, and you have not seen that. Have not really seen that happen in weeks, right? You haven't seen them kind of.
It's been Atlanta clunker since like the Pats game against Bailey Zappi. It's been pretty much that long.
Games, the game that they lost to the Bills, that wasn't a clunker. They played great. Very, very good team. So that's just tough. It's sucks, kind of a tough pill to swallow. They're not out of it at all. I know like FPI and like some of the other matrix and like measuring stick little calculations and everything kind of don't give them a great chance now, but it can change drastically again next week. If you win the last 2 games here and then just kind of see what happens. If you go out winning those last 2 games and you don't get in, they got nothing to blame but themselves, but I think, you'll still take it at this point. So.
Well, yeah, at this point you need to hope for, I don't know, like a New Year's Eve miracle. With the Giants are obviously favored pretty highly against the Colts and Nick Foles. And then you got the Commanders, who are pretty highly favored against the Browns. And then the Seahawks, who right now are favored over the Jets.
I could see all 3 of those teams losing, though, because I don't think any of those teams are that much better. I know they're favored, but are that much better than those other teams, right?
Even the Colts, the Giants over the Colts, I feel like.
Colts legitimately stink, and that's the one, right, with the Giants, right? But who did the Giants play the last week of the year?
Last week the Giants, I think did they win? Oh no, the Giants lost. No, the Giants lost to the Vikings last week.
Right. So
that was a close game. It was like 3-point game.
Close game, right? Vikings are not my favorite team in the world. I don't think they're great. But I don't know. I think the Giants could easily lose one of their last 2. They could definitely lose this game. I would not put it past the Giants to lose this game. They don't impress me greatly, and I don't think they're that much better. Now the Colts are bad, right? Especially Nick Foles led Colts are not not overly impressive.
It's not Eagles Nick Foles, that's for sure.
No, I don't. What a fall from grace that has been. I mean, I will not that surprised. I wasn't overly impressed with Nick Foles any other time before that playoff run, but I honestly thought maybe with the Colts getting, I thought, if they could hold on to, if they kept Frank Reich around, maybe that would work for Nick Foles, right? Because it was the same offensive coordinator and everything like that. But the Jeff Saturday led Colts are not good. So, yeah, I don't know. It's you're right. Maybe we need a little bit. I wouldn't say a miracle, but you definitely need some help. And it could happen, but if the Lions just go out there and take care of business, I still think there's a decent chance. I don't think it's as good if they just won last week, because everything fell the way they needed it to last week. If the Lions would have came away with a win,
and then they're in the driver's seat where they could potentially even. I mean, then they win this game and they're almost guaranteed in with everyone else losing.
Right now, the Packers are clawing at a spot.
Could come down to that Packers spot at the end of the week. I mean,
right. You don't want that to be the game that determines everything, right?
I don't feel super good about it. Obviously, the Panthers have the Saints, so the Panthers are, like I said, the Panthers are still fighting for a playoff spot, and then they play the Bucs this week, so they win against the Bucs this week, and they take the lead in that division.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're a scrub team, especially surprisingly after they gave up Robbie Anderson and Christian McCaffrey. And
yeah, I think they're just, I think Steve Wilkes has done a really good job with them, and they know who they are. They're not trying to, and they're just like settled on a quarterback. They're just going to go with Sam Darnold, I know, and take what he does well and
try to manage in with Sam Darnold. Right?
Like you don't need to be a quarterback centric offense, right? Especially if you can run the ball like that. Like you don't need to be. I mean, the NFL is a quarterback-led league, right? But you do not need to be – if you can run the ball like that, which most teams cannot, and most teams, they even don't normally do it like that, right? I mean, they're an excellent running team, but no NFL team does that typically. But if you can and consistently move the ball on the ground, you don't need to rely on great quarterback play all the time. So
I kind of mentioned to you after, what was it, a couple of days ago, I went through the ESPN playoff machine, and I felt like the odds they got pretty low for the playoffs after losing. With everyone else losing, it's like, because the Cowboys, they had clinched. If they didn't clinch it last week, they definitely did this week after beating the Eagles. So either the Eagles or Cowboys are now guaranteed the fifth seed, which means that week 18 games need to matter for the Eagles and Cowboys, or they'll probably be resting players.
They'll be chilling
the crucial games versus the New York Giants and the Washington Commanders. Because so essentially for that to happen, we need the Saints to upset the Eagles this week. The Cowboys need to beat the Titans on Thursday.
Hurts, is he playing? Is he going to be out again?
As of now, I saw Minshew still playing. But
yeah, not that Minshew played all that bad. I mean, they still scored like 34 points, so it wasn't like
that offense has a lot of pieces, because I think they're without Lane Johnson at tackle too right now.
Yeah, I think they'll be okay regardless. But unfortunately, you're relying on some bad teams to upset some really, really good teams. It's not just like bad teams against okay teams. You know what I mean? That's kind of where we're at right now. And the annoying part is you're going to look back at this season and think, man, the Lions had every opportunity to be in the playoffs easily. So that's
in the same breath, if we think long enough about it, it's like they also overachieved expectations in a lot of ways.
That's true. That is true. I mean, I don't know. What you probably slotted them at 8 wins, I think is where you had them, right?
Yeah, I had them at 8 and 9. Yeah.
And I had them at 6 or 7, right? So So
you had them. I think you had 7. Yeah.
So, and I could convince myself up to 10, right? I really could have talked myself into that, but I don't think that. Overall, I think they've overachieved. They beat some teams that I didn't think they would beat, or been playing with some teams I didn't think they had a chance against. But they lost too many games right at the beginning of the year. You can point back and say, if at the end of the year, if they miss it by a game, you can point at the Carolina game, right? If you want to, as the game that, is the reason
Hard to
they
point at that one too, though, with the Panthers potentially making the playoffs.
exactly. And it's like, okay, well, you want to point at that game as like, man, they just laid an egg there. Okay, fair enough. But they also played horrendous football at the beginning of the year. Like to me, you're pointing out the 1-6 start. That's the way you got to point out that you got to pick out 2 or 3 games out of that.
Because a lot of people expected us to try to maybe surprise New England. We laid an absolute dud in that game.
Worst game they played all year, and it wasn't even close. I know people will point to last week, but that was the worst game. That was ugly. That was terrible. That was absolutely terrible. So, yeah,
Is it? We got shut out by the Patriots and Bailey Zappi. I felt like that was the worst game of the year, but I felt like I was watching that game at a bar, and I was just like, this is really hard to watch.
Yeah.
Granted, I mean, the offense was still able to move the football against Carolina, but the physicality of the offensive line for Carolina was also just bullying.
Well, it just wasn't fun to watch. It was just painful to watch last week. The problem is last week was probably maybe even more painful than the Patriots game because
you're in a position to get in.
Like at least in the Patriots game, it's like, man, this team stinks. We know they stink, right? We were fully on board with them stinking at that point, and then they turn it around, obviously. So I don't know. I mean, overall, I think it's a great job overall by coaching staff this year. I mean, we'll do a season post-mortem, I'm sure, at some point, hopefully after the playoffs. Hopefully they somehow make it in. But overall, I can't be disappointed. Everything else at this point is gravy.
Yeah, we're still in a good enough position. So, let's talk Michigan football here. We'll talk that playoff game.
Yeah.
I mean, Max Duggan. We're going to play Texas Christian and Max Duggan, who certainly he's got one heck of a story this year. He was a Heisman finalist, had a really good season. A lot of people asked what Michigan players thought about TCU. The number one thing they thought they knew about that was a quarterback. I mean, Max Duggan's been a household name for the most part this year in college football. Lost in the Big 12. He got beat up in the Big 12 championship game, and they lost that game. But he balled. And so I think part of it was the way he kind of just pushed through that game. Showed his ability to run the ball. And he's a clunk. He's a big dude. So I think that worries me. Michigan, just like the Lions, haven't been, any kind of impressive against running quarterbacks.
Michigan, as a stat, Michigan has faced the least amount of quarterback runs in the entire country.
It came in like 1 week where I was like, okay, we can't stop. What was it, Talia?
Well, yeah, I think he ran around a little bit, and then there might have been. I mean, CJ Stroud didn't do any running. I mean, think about it. Who are the quarterbacks that they faced? They faced week 1. Nobody ran, obviously, against Colorado State. Hawaii, no. UConn, no. Talia, I think, ran around a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then from there,
if we would have played Johnny Langan and Rutgers, maybe it would have been different. But we didn't play Johnny Langan.
No. What was after that? Penn State. I mean, okay, Sean Clifford ripped off one big run.
I think Nebraska tried to a little bit with some of their guys with Smothers and Purdy, but they didn't have a ton of success.
Right. So I don't know. Like, I think running quarterbacks scare me, especially a guy who's willing to run and willing to get hit, right? Because especially a guy with size like that, right? Because the thing about Duggan is he's just not going to fold, right? He's not going to fold in the moment just because you're hitting him, right? Just because maybe he's going to keep coming at you and keep coming at you and keep coming at you. He's not going to back down, right? Mentally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really impressive to watch. Like you said, he was physically beat up and exhausted in that big game. He single-handedly kept them in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been the case all year long, right? He's been a superhero for them. In a lot of these games, they've won a ton of close games. They've had to come back in a lot of games, and that's kind of been their MO. They're a great second half team too. I know Michigan, is considered best second half team, and statistically they are. But TCU's been pretty darn good in second halves as well. So,
Well, and I was gonna talk about TCU because a lot we hyper focus on Max Duggan, and I mean in a lot of ways he's a Heisman finalist, so he should get some credit. But like, there's a slew of talented players there. Like, he's not 100% of the offense. It's pro caliber talent. You know, Quentin Johnston's a really good receiver, but
Yep.
like Tay Barber, Darius Davis have been good receivers there. Even Kendra Miller at running back. And I was looking at the offensive line, and it's senior, redshirt junior. I mean, it's a very large and experienced offensive line.
Yep.
So I mean, it's trying to look at the matchups against, you know, Michigan's D line is Chris Jenkins and Mozzie and Mason Graham going to be able to hold the middle, and is Mike Morris going to be healthy enough to come back and be effective in this game?
Yeah, I mean, from all reports, Morris is good, but I mean, that's a big piece. I mean, that's a huge piece. If they have, you know, him. I mean, he hasn't even really played the last 2 games, right? And he's probably the best lineman on the team overall. I think their TCU's offensive line and running game is underrated because Duggan gets so much attention, right? I mean, Quentin Johnston to me is the guy that scares me the most besides Duggan, right? And they kind of go hand in hand, obviously, because Michigan, if they've had a flaw on this defense at all, they've struggled with some downfield big receivers, right?
Marvin Harrison had a nice game, obviously, but I mean, Marvin Harrison's on another level,
right? Marvin Harrison is better than any receiver in the country, right? And he had a pretty nice game against Michigan. They did kind of take him away for a good chunk of the second half, right? But Johnson's even a different kind of receiver than him. He reminds me more of like Keon Coleman for Michigan State, and Keon Coleman had a big game too. Michigan's typically adjusted to those guys as soon as they've started to go off a little bit in second halves and stuff. So I would anticipate that happening again. But that guy scares me because he is huge. He's huge.
Yeah.
And I do think, you know, like you mentioned, TCU's offensive line and running game, they are underrated. They're not just, it's not, yes, it is an air raid offense. That is the structure of their offense, right? But they run the ball more than a typical air raid offense, right? They don't necessarily stick to it like, you know, like a Michigan would, or
enough to keep you honest.
But they definitely keep you honest, and they hit some big plays with that run game too, because you're honing in on, you know, Duggan or on the passing game. So
yeah, Quentin Johnston's 6'4" frame. It's just you know, the defense. I think we're gonna be able to move the ball. I think we're gonna be able to put up points. I think Donovan Edwards is poised for a good game. I think JJ still needs to take care of the football and try to make the throws that he's given. Because I think there are going to be holes in the defense. But I do expect this game to be kind of high scoring. I expect Quentin Johnston to have a big game. I expect Kendra Miller to be getting pretty close to 90 yards, even on maybe 15, 16 carries.
Yeah.
I expect Duggan to have a pretty solid game himself. I think Duggan's going to maybe have a pick. I'll give Duggan 3 touchdown passes, 320 yards, because I think he'll play behind for some of the game. But I anticipate this to be a high scoring game, and I lean towards like 41 to, I don't know, 41 to 31, maybe.
All right. I think the line's 7.5 or 8, right?
Okay.
Which seems about right, but you know, I think Michigan if Michigan can control the game the way they want, like I think Michigan can actually play any style, right? I really do think they can play any style, but they want to be able to have, you know, that drive late in the third quarter where it just kind of takes the life out of you, right? Where they go up by 2 scores by bleeding 8 minutes off right? If they have that, if they're able to do that, you know, and then just kind of weather the storm, kind of like they did against Ohio State a little bit, where, hey, TCU might make a few big plays. You just got to be able to answer them, right? They might be able to, get some downfield shots. Maybe Duggan rips off a big run or something, but you got to be able to answer them, and just stay with them right there, and then get, you know, into the second half with either a bit of a lead or with it being tied. If they can do that, I feel really good about Michigan's chances, because the biggest thing that Michigan has going for them is, yes, their second half, you know, but their offensive line wears on you, right?
Mhm.
And that's why you see Donovan Edwards having these massive second halves and these huge gains in the second half when maybe he didn't do as much in the first half, is because this offensive line wears on you and wears on you and wears on you, and then eventually you don't even necessarily break, but it's just like, man, you're just giving up 5 yards at carry, and it's just Michigan's had the ball for 10 minutes and you haven't even seen the ball yet, right? And then they're up 11 in the fourth quarter, and you're like, oh crap, like we need to score here or the game's over, right? So I would expect that a little bit. I'm with you. I think it's going to be a little bit back and forth, especially early. If Michigan's defense can force some field goals instead of giving up some touchdowns, I think that, like they've done recently against Purdue and against Ohio State, I think that bodes well, because I do think Michigan's offense is going to be able to move the ball. I don't think TCU, I could see this going one of two ways, right? TCU is able to use some speed on defense to frustrate Michigan and pressure McCarthy and, get in receivers' faces and make some tackles on Edwards, right?
Yeah.
And that gives Duggan, enough time to kind of figure it out and put up some points and be right there at the end, right? Or Michigan's just going to be able to pave them, right? Because they haven't seen a team that can do what Michigan does on the ground all year. The Big 12 just they don't have that, right? They don't have that kind of team. So if Michigan, if they can run on them and just consistently get 4, 5, 6, 7 yards and maybe big plays later, Michigan won't even attempt to throw the ball if they don't have to, right? And I would feel a lot better about doing that type of thing with Blake Corum, right? Because he's more of that 6, 7, 5 yard back at a time, and then hit a big play. But I think overall the ceiling with Donovan Edwards as their tailback is bigger for the big plays. So I will pick Michigan 38, TCU 28.
Okay, so we both stand in a 10-point game.
10 points. I think the defense will figure Duggan out a little bit, right? They'll make the adjustments. Maybe TCU might even have 17 points or something at halftime, right? Or even 21 points at halftime, right?
Yeah, we've seen the second half team that Michigan is. That would be right. The point where they see. That's kind of where I stand. Michigan, I think, gives up like almost 24. Yeah, 17 to 24 points from TCU in that first half. But then after that, it's going to be tough sales. They're going to have to push. They're going to have to grind for a touchdown and maybe a field goal.
Yep.
Just to feel like that's
right. Turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
Just for Michigan or TCU, really, because that does change the game. So if you don't let TCU steal a possession or two, JJ kind of plays within himself, which he has for the most part done all year long. I don't know. I'm not worried.
Yeah, I mean, like for the most part, I mean, is it a knock to say that he's played this year a little bit like Cade McNamara, but has enough explosiveness in him?
Yeah, I mean, other than he's starting to figure out some of the downfield stuff late in the year, right? Obviously blew up against Ohio State, and then he had some great plays against Purdue. I think he's just getting better and better and better. And I don't know. I think we're going to be ready to go. And I think 10-point game is reasonable. I could see Michigan dominating on the ground and ending up looking like the Penn State game, right? Like, man, TCU is right there, and they're, but Michigan's clearly a better team, right? And and then they just completely pull away. So I could definitely see that happening. Duggan reminds me a little bit of Sean Clifford, except he's much better, right? But similar type of running style. Not necessarily fast, but definitely physical, and has enough speed certainly to run away from you when he gets going. So kind of a similar team, I think. And they rely on a lot of speed on defense, like Penn State does, and Michigan had completely handled that, right? So we will see.
I actually think Penn State's a better defense. So
Penn State overall is a better defense. I do too.
I just think they collapsed on themselves once they saw Michigan felt like unstoppable. Kind of like you said, they grinded a lot of possessions away. They wore them down, and I think Penn State was they almost felt like it almost looked like they gave up it a little bit, and that's kind of why that game obviously looks lopsided. But we've seen a lot of Penn State games this year where the defense looks incredible. Sure. I don't think TCU and any Big 12 defense is notoriously strong on defense.
Right. This game scares me in a way because it's like, man, like, I mean,
are we getting overconfident against like a Big 12 defense?
defense, but like at the same time, it's like they haven't faced anything like Michigan's offense or Michigan's defense, right? But they do have some players, right? So we'll definitely have to see. And Michigan's got to show up, right? They haven't really not shown up at all this year. Even games where they haven't played great early, they've definitely always shown up. And this team is definitely motivated and focused to make up for last year. But
that Illinois game kind of seems like they didn't show up, but I don't know.
Well, Forum got hurt, and that was the kind of that. You know what I mean? I don't say they didn't show up; they just didn't play very well, and their best player got hurt. So, and their backup, Dan Edwards was hurt. That would have changed the game if you had Donovan Edwards.
Yeah.
So the big thing is they got to come out of the gate playing better than they did against Georgia last year, right? They got to come out and ready to let it rip and have a good first quarter, right? They can't be down 14-0 after the first quarter and kind of playing on their heels a little bit. Doesn't mean they can't come back, because I think they could, but that's not something that you can do, I think, in these playoff games. I think you just got to come out firing, and even if it's back and forth a little bit at the beginning, that's okay, because you'll settle down and adjust, but you got to be able to come out and move the ball and score some points early. So
yeah, got to bite some kneecaps off and hit him in the mouth.
Yes, absolutely. I like the kneecap biting. That's a good idea. Let me get Dan Campbell in there for a quick speech before the game. Get him fired up.
That might